Good morning, boys and girls. All right, so today is day 2 of Virginia Studies, and today we're going to talk about the culture of colonial Virginia. So let's look at our objectives here. Today we'll use interactive notes and a smartboard lesson. So I can explain the different cultures and traditions in Virginia, and I'll have it when I can correctly identify each culture's traditions. So we will be completing a culture of colonial Virginia note page today, along with a map of where these cultures settled. All right, so remember, boys and girls, just like it was before on the last note page, anytime you see the words that are bolded and underlined, those go on your note page. So you may have to pause your video in order to get everything written and then continue. So people affect or change the area in which they live. So whenever people settle in an area, they change the culture and landscape to reflect their beliefs, customs, and architecture. Those 3 things should go on your note page. The cultural landscape of Virginia colony showed bits of all of these different cultures. So a cultural landscape, boys and girls, it is what an area looks like based on the cultures that have lived there. The culture is the beliefs, customs, and practices of a group that gets passed on from generation to generation. So where do you see bits of culture from the English, Africans, Native Americans, Germans, Scots-Irish, and colonial Virginia? So let's look. So examples of architecture that reflect different cultures are barns, homes, and places of worship. So if you look here, down here you have an English farmhouse. Up to the top you have a German barn. To the right you have an African barn. And then to the bottom, you have a Scots-Irish barn. Look at how different those are from one another, boys and girls. That is the difference in the culture and how they built things. So here are some examples of colonial churches. You have the English church, the German church, and then the Scots-Irish church. So the names of many places in Virginia come from different cultures. All right, boys and girls, get ready to write this on your note page. The English name, Richmond, is an English name. The name Richmond comes from the English culture. American Indian name is Roanoke. The name Roanoke is an American Indian name that comes from the American Indian culture. During the second half of the 1600s, Virginia's population got much bigger. Now, boys and girls, I hope you remember that in 1607 was when the English settlers came over to the New World and started making their settlement. So we're skipping large amounts of time here. When we're talking about the German and Scots-Irish coming over, you're going to 1640. So in 1607, when only American Indians lived here before the English settlers came, there weren't a lot of people that lived on this land. And now we're thinking 1640, that's over 30 years apart. Okay, so in 1640, the population was only about 10,000 people that lived in Virginia. And in the 1700s, about 50,000 people lived there. So if you think about 1607 to 1700, that's almost 100 years. Not quite, but almost. So what groups of people are living in Virginia by 1620? You had English, the English settlers, which had came over, Native Americans, which lived in Virginia to begin with, and then the Africans were brought. So soon after that, the Germans and Scots-Irish settlers arrive. take a look at where settlers come from to live in Virginia. So Virginia is right about here where the Native Americans lived, okay? So if you look, I'm gonna put a red dot. It's somewhere close to right there, and Native Americans lived there already. So the English settlers are coming from way up here, and they travel around the Atlantic Ocean like this, up into the Chesapeake Bay to settle on Virginia. And that's how the Germans and Scots-Irish get here also, because they're right here. And then Africans come from here. Okay? So they're traveling long distances to get to Virginia, to North America. All right, get ready to fill in your note page, boys and girls. In what parts of Virginia did these 5 different culture groups settle? English and other Europeans settled primarily in the coastal plain Tidewater and Piedmont regions. Germans and Scots-Irish settled primarily in the Shenandoah Valley, which was along the migration route. And Africans were settled primarily in the coastal plain Tidewater and Piedmont regions where tobacco agriculture required a great deal of labor. And prior, which means before, prior to the arrival of the settlers, American Indians lived all throughout Virginia. After the settlers arrived, most were forced inland. That means they went further back in Virginia. And migration, boys and girls, and living in new areas caused people to adapt old customs to their new environments. All right, so boys and girls, here we are going to switch over to the document camera. Okay. All right, boys and girls, I have switched over to the document camera, and I want you to look at your map that looks like this. The title of this is Settlement Areas in Virginia. Now, I'm going to go a little bit out of order because I like to do things just in the order in which the groups were in Virginia. So on your map key for the Indians, I want you to take your yellow, and this is going to be represented by a yellow line, okay? And we're just going to outline, and it doesn't have to be perfect, Virginia in yellow, because the Indians lived all throughout Virginia before any other groups came. So I'm going to outline, and I'm not going to forget the Eastern Shore over here. All right. So all of Virginia is outlined in yellow because Indians were here first, and they lived all over Virginia. Now, when we think about our next group that we've talked about, the English came next in 1607. So I am going to indicate the English by a blue star, just like that. And I'm going to write 1607 because that's when they came. That's when they started to come, okay? Now, we know from our notes page that the English settled primarily in the coastal plain Tidewater region, correct? And the Piedmont regions. So this is the coastal plain Tidewater. I'm going to put blue stars all over the coastal plain Tidewater region because that's where my English were, and the Piedmont regions. And your stars do not have to be perfect. Try your best, but the English lived in the coastal plain Tidewater region right there, okay? And remember, they came in 1607. Okay, boys and girls, the next group that came to Virginia are the African Americans. And we are going to represent African Americans by a tobacco leaf because African Americans helped us to expand the Virginia colony tobacco economy. Now, I know that does not look like a very good tobacco leaf, but we're going to make it work. And they came in 1619. And remember, they did not come willingly. They were brought against their will. So, and they lived primarily in the coastal plain tidewater region where tobacco was grown the most. All right, so I'm drawing my tobacco leaves here to represent that African Americans lived primarily in this area. Okay. Now, the next group of people are the Germans and Scots Irish, and they came after 1619, and we are going to represent them with the Scots Irish. We're going to represent with a red triangle, okay? And they lived primarily in the Shenandoah Valley, which was along the migration route. All right, so that is right here in the Valley and Ridge region. So I'm going to represent that group of people with a red triangle. Okay. And then the Germans came and they lived in the same area. So I'm just going to represent this by shading it in purple. So if you shade it around your red triangles, that will be where the Germans primarily settled. Okay? Now, boys and girls, you are going to take a picture of your note page and the map that we just created to upload on the Class Kick page.